Story 1. An F4 tornado tore off the back half of the house I was hunkered down in during the middle of the night. Right after the power went out, I covered my 1-year-old son with my body, and I heard my husband's grandfather say, "Here it comes." I remember my ears popping from the pressure shift. It was all over in about 30 seconds. I have chills as I'm writing this. It was the scariest night of my life. Story 2. When you come in tomorrow, do not clock in. Come straight to my office. I was apparently getting a new laptop, and we changed to a new timekeeping system. Story 3. Hi, I just delivered your groceries, and the child who answered the door had a lot of blood on them. That's how we found out our son was cutting himself. You know that feeling when you step out onto something that may not take your weight, and it bends under you, and for a brief moment you don't know if that bending will stop before it breaks? Felt exactly like that, but mentally and emotionally. He's 6 years older and in a much better place now, thankfully, but yeah, that was a scary time. Story 4. I was out camping with friends, and it was the middle of the night. We were sitting at the campfire, and my friend looked behind me and just whispered, "Who was that?" with a panicked face. I almost lost control. It was just some random person looking for his campsite. Story 5. My mother told me as a teenager many years ago that the doctors had given her 6 months to live because the cancer had become resistant to treatment. She was gone 2.5 months later, and I learned the meaning of being an orphan. Story 6. Call the resuscitation team. It was seconds after my first son was born, and he came out not crying. It was quiet for what felt like hours until the team worked on him, and my ex-husband went up to him and said, "Hey, buddy." That's when my son started crying. Story 7. Second plane is coming in. On September 11th, I was 3 blocks from the towers on the roof of my building. One person saw the United Airlines plane over the water and started screaming, "Second plane." Terrifying. Story 8. When my son was about 2 years old, I was supervising bath time. He was just playing with some bath toys and talking to himself. I asked, "What was that, buddy?" He slowly turned to look at me and said, "Simple in the face, simple in the fire." Story 9. On the radio at work, there has been a mass shooting at a North Tucson grocery store. It was the same store where my wife and son were shopping that morning. Thankfully, they were okay. Story 10. I was in Hawaii and I got an alert on my phone. This is not a drill. Naturally, I turned my phone off and went back to sleep. I was determined to die peacefully in my sleep no matter what. Story 11. I operate on you tomorrow because the next day I am on vacation and I do not know if you will be here when I get back. My heart surgeon 5 years ago. Great doctor. Terrible bedside manners. Story 12. In 1986, in Israel near the Lebanese border, I met a soldier who was on his 3-year military service. He was Lebanese but wanted to get Israeli citizenship. I don't know what made him tell me his life story. People tend to tell me things to get a burden off their hearts. It must be my looks or something. I couldn't sleep for 3 nights after that. One part of his story still shakes me, even after all those years. He grew up during the civil war in Lebanon. When he was 12, his uncle handed him a rifle and pointed across the street. "See those shadows over there? Those are our enemies. Shoot." He stared at me, and then he said this sentence, "And I shot in the direction my uncle had pointed. I never knew if I hit one of the shadows." He went silent and started to cry. I didn't know that those shadows were humans. Story 13. When I was a kid, I saved some money, bought some ice cream, and went to my grandparents to surprise them. After about 10 years, I had this dream recreating that situation almost exactly. I'm buying ice cream, driving my bicycle to my grandparents, and calling their apartment via intercom. In the dream, Grandma answers. I say cheerfully to her, "Hey, surprise grandson visit. I've got ice cream." Granny chuckles like I was a 6-year-old confidently saying something silly and says with her soft, kind voice, "Mandarinium, we are long dead. You have nothing to do here, go now." Yes, they were both dead for several years when I had this dream. Story 14. You picked the wrong one. He is a textbook example of a sociopath. My adopted son's new psychiatrist confirmed my worst fear. I was told that his behavior would never improve even with medication and therapy, and that I needed to take the necessary steps to ensure my safety. Sadly, he was not wrong. I have been violently attacked multiple times, and he nearly killed me once. It has been 5 years, and I cannot do this anymore. Story 15. All right, motherfuckers. I was at work, 19 years old. I heard a male voice say that, and when I looked up, there was a gun pointing at me and my coworkers. I truly thought I was going to die that night. This happened 32 years ago, and to this day I freeze and have a 10 to 15 second long freakout if I hear a male voice say that. Luckily, it's not something I hear very often. Story 16. There's a lump in your neck. Poke, poke, poke at 16 and alone in the doctor's office. Biopsy, surgery, and radioactive iodine later. I'm thyroid cancer free. Story 17. 60 Minutes are the biggest liars in the world. They engaged in deliberate deception to interfere with the last election. They deserve a long prison sentence. Story 18. That's not normal, said by my doctor. Brace for impact, said by a pilot. Both times, everything turned out fine, but they were extremely scary to hear. Story 19. When my father had cancer and was put in the palliative care ward, I asked my mom what that meant, and she said it's where they put people who are dying. That's how I found out my father was dying. Story 20. Venice Beach Bar. Girlfriend upsets a Hispanic gang member. He whistles and 5 more guys on bikes are ready to confront us. Bartender says it's better to just run out the back and get in your car. The bartender says the police won't make it in time. Go now. Story 21. Your body is slowly shutting down on you. Your liver and kidneys are failing. You're slowly dying. We need to intubate you but need your consent. Scariest moment in my life, honestly. Story 22. She's dead. I woke up to my parents screaming bloody murder. My sister had overdosed in the basement. My dad came upstairs just repeating, "She's dead. She's dead." I froze, and it still hasn't hit me 8 years later, despite her best friends showing up crying their eyes out and my grandma calling me because someone from New York had stolen my identity that morning, asking her for cash. If it was one sentence, it would be, "She's dead." Story 23. Doctor. There were complications during surgery. The priest is giving your father last rites. He was fine. Firefighters. The chimney collapsed. The bricks crushed the gas exhaust. You were minutes away from dying of carbon monoxide poisoning. Before carbon monoxide alarms. Mom. Your dad didn't wake up this morning. Mom. I have breast cancer. Doctor. We think you might have thyroid cancer. It was Graves' disease, not cancer. NT. The head MRI was concerning. You need to see a neurologist as soon as possible. Immediately. I can't refer you to one or diagnose you, but you really need to see a neurologist. A cerebral spinal fluid vein had collapsed, backing up all the CSF, crushing everything. What is trauma for $500? Story 24. They have to take the baby now. My sister-in-law calling that if the doctors don't operate now, both the baby and daughter will die. Both now, 8 years later, are great. Anna, the baby, was born 107 days early. We had a 4-hour drive, not a noise made in the car. Story 25. I worked at an inpatient hospital and heard a patient arguing with themselves. They said, "I am hearing voices telling me to kill everyone." Luckily, they were in a hospital setting that could help them. Story 26. My friend was working on his car in the driveway while his very young toddler daughter played nearby. Suddenly, his daughter looked at him and said, "You're going to die on a bridge, and I'm going to have a new friend called Daddy." My friend said the hair on his neck raised, and he was freaked out for a long time. I'm still freaked out, and I wasn't even there. By the way, I lost touch with that friend and do not know if he died on a bridge yet. Story 27. I was alone in the bathroom of a bar when a drunk man walked in. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt and said, "This is the ladies' room." And he looked at me and said, "I know." I instantly had all possible options running through my mind. Whether I should try to lock myself in a stall before he could grab me, scream before he could put his hand over my mouth, or push past him to the door. Story 28. Veterinarian. Your dog has both an inflamed heart and kidney disease. If we treat one, it will make the other worse. Me. What would you do if it were your dog? Veterinarian. Keeping him alive any longer will only be an exercise in pain. My heart broke so hard. Story 29. Las Vegas, Nevada. Edit. It wasn't an active shooter, but it was an armed robbery in progress. In the moment, it was the biggest adrenaline rush I ever had in Vegas. Since then, there have been more, but the Internal Revenue Service doesn't need to hear about those. Story 30. Your daughter has cancer. I don't think I've ever cried harder in my life. The good news is that after 2.5 years of brutal chemotherapy, she is 100% clear now, happy, healthy, living her best life, and excelling in university. Story 31. Miles Davis, while we waited for his wife, Cicely Tyson, said to me, "Find something to play on the stereo." Yikes. What music to play for Miles Davis? Story 32. You had a cardiac event. It was actually much scarier after walking into the emergency room and telling them I had unrelenting indigestion. I was immediately taken back, and a whole bunch of people suddenly showed up. Story 33. I'm sentencing you to 15 years imprisonment to begin when the doctors agree you are mentally stable and the section can be lifted. You have pleaded guilty, sparing your victims from having to give testimony, but you are a dangerous individual and you need to be kept well away from the general public for a long time, and more psychological testing will be required. Story 34. Has anyone ever told you or your husband you were missing a kidney? An ultrasound technician was scanning our then 8-month-old daughter's kidneys. Apparently, she was born missing one. It was not caught at her prenatal ultrasound. Story 35. Oh, nice to meet you, Leather. I didn't think there was anyone down there with the kids today. This was said by a daycare director who my friend worked for while we were in college. The director didn't know my friend was working today and didn't know I was even there. The oldest group, 6 to 7 years old, were still little kids being left alone in the basement for all she knew. Even worse, my friend left me alone with those kids for hours. So it wasn't like they had trusted supervision on me. Just a complete adult stranger they had no idea existed. Alone with children in a basement for hours. And the staff had no idea. The basement wasn't even locked. Good news, I'm very much not a pedophile, but they got ridiculously lucky that I'm not. We reported them and told everyone we knew to never use that place. I think they're still operating, sadly. Story 36. When the police knocked on my door at 3 a.m., telling me my mom was dead, I wasn't sure what could top that. The scariest thing I can think of now is something bad happening to my fiancé or my cats. Story 37. You need to come home now. I live 6 hours away, and it was the week my dad died. She's gone. I received a phone call while I was driving. I was the first person her wife told outside of the immediate family. 3 months after losing my dad, I lost a dear lifelong friend. This is so-and-so, your sister's roommate. I was told to call you. You need to come home. Your sister is on the way to the hospital. She tried to harm herself. Story 38. They are moving her to palliative care, my brother's wife. She went downhill so fast. She was gone 5 days later, 10 days shy of her 35th birthday. Cancer is terrible, but paraneoplastic syndrome is way worse. Story 39. Worked with a grandmother raping murderer in youth corrections. During a group meeting, he told a peer that he was going to rape his little sister matter-of-factly. The inmate didn't kill him, which is surprising. I think he was one of the few who had potential and knew not to waste it. Story 40. My doctors missed that I was pregnant and had me on medications that were not safe for pregnancy. I barely remember anything besides being told I was at the end of the second trimester and my daughter was not viable. Story 41. A few months ago, I had a very big health scare that lasted from April to August. It started as a persistent cough and respiratory issues. Then the coughing got bad enough that it was activating my gag reflex, and I was throwing up once a day for about a week. Then it got bad enough to warrant an inhaler because I was having episodes of not being able to breathe. Then it got so bad that we were afraid I had literally broken a rib from coughing so hard because I was literally doubled over in pain, crying. This lasted for months, and doctors couldn't figure out the cause. We swabbed and ruled out the usual culprits. We did x-rays, computed tomography scans, and breathing tests where I was put in these cylindrical tubes and had my nose plugged and was forced to breathe as hard as I could into a mouthpiece connected to a larger machine. They couldn't find anything. They put me on antibiotics twice, steroids, antacids, allergy medications, all while I had codeine I was taking to suppress my cough and let me sleep at night, an emergency inhaler, and a nebulizer I had to use 4 times a day. Still nothing until it just went away on its own. My doctor's conclusion? It could just be seasonal. My heart sank at the idea that I would have to go through all of this again next year, and that this would just be a regular occurrence for me for the rest of my life. Story 42. My parents and my wife and I were camping in our respective campers. In the middle of the night, maybe at 1 in the morning, my mom burst into our camper and yelled, "I need you now. I think your dad needs cardiopulmonary resuscitation." I got there, and Dad was unconscious on the floor of their camper. I patted him a couple of times and yelled, "Dad!" He started to come to. We got an ambulance and he went to the hospital. He had a heart attack. That was about 10 years ago, and he's 5 years in on a transplanted heart and doing great. But yeah, the prospect of performing cardiopulmonary resuscitation on your own father is pretty terrifying. Story 43. We have done all we can. It was the night the doctors told me, my sister, and father that my mother was not going to wake up from her ruptured aneurysm. I am pretty sure there was more, but the moment I heard that sentence, I just disconnected from reality. I might have passed out. That entire time is still a blur to me.